just be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Hillary Clinton on Friday evening. Basket of deplorables already entered into the annals of campaign flubs alongside Mitt Romney's 47% comments or Barack Obama's remark about some Americans clinging to their guns and religion. So how bad is this going to be for Hillary Clinton? Let's talk to our panel. CNN commentator Bakari Sellers, Tennessee Congressman Diane Black, CNN political analyst Kirsten Powers, and CNN commentator Andre Bauer. Bakari, you're out there saying that this is not a gaffe in any way.
No, I don't think it's a gaffe in any way. I mean, I think that there is a clear difference between the 47% remark and what Hillary Clinton said. The 47% remark showed Mitt Romney's animus towards the poor. This remark shows Hillary Clinton's animus towards racists and bigots. I mean, it's very clear.
You think half of Donald Trump's supporters are racist?
Well,
half?
I think that I can show you polls where over half of his supporters actually believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim informant, and over half of his supporters don't believe he was born in the United States. So I can show you polls of that nature. For many of us, this election is about beating back bigotry, but I do want to be clear, because I have two friends on the panel. Not all Donald Trump supporters are bigots. Not all, by any stretch. However, they do have to be okay with supporting a bigot. I think that's an important connotation.
Congressman, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. There are a lot of deplorable things being said by Donald Trump supporters on social media and at events. You've seen the shirts that say things that I can't even say. Trump that B word about Hillary Clinton. I mean, there are horrific scenes that we see at those events.
Let me just say this. I don't care what the title is or the title, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I don't want my presidential candidates putting people in baskets. And I will tell you, not 47% of the people in my district who support Donald Trump are racists or bigots. And I think that it is deplorable for someone running for president to start out by saying, by the way, if you don't agree with me, you're a bigot or you're a racist. And that's what she's saying. And I'm insulted by that. And I think the American people will be insulted by that.
She said half, and then she took it back. But I didn't make the comments. I'm not going to defend them. Take a listen to Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, Governor Mike Pence, capitalizing and talking about these remarks.
Hillary, they are not a basket of anything. They are Americans, and they deserve your respect. I've not heard that level of disdain for Americans that I can't even repeat since Barack Obama described people that opposed him as people who cling to their guns and religion.
Kirsten, what did you think when you heard the remarks?
I thought it was gaffe, for sure. And that's why she says she regrets that she said it. It's just never good for
Well, she said she regrets saying half.
Right,
So,
well, that's what I mean, that half. No, I think it would be right to say that there is a disturbing percentage. I don't know we can put an exact number on it, but there is a larger percentage than normal, I think, of Trump supporters who say misogynist and sexist things. And I think that is different than what we've seen with other Republican nominees, the people that he's kind of brought out, the alt-right people, for example.
But I don't mean to disagree with Kirsten on here, but you just can't. We put that on his supporters, but no, we're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about somebody who literally, Paul Ryan said that his comments about Judge Curiel were racist. He said Mexicans were rapists. And then just last week, this is my issue. Just last week, he said all African Americans, you're living in bad conditions, your schools are bad, you may walk down the street and get shot. And we classify that as outreach.
No, but she's not criticizing Donald Trump. She's criticizing the people who support him. And I think that that's different because I think there are a lot of people who are just your average Republican supporters who aren't racist and misogynist. And I just don't think it's good for a candidate and a possible president of the United States to be just disparaging American voters, just as a matter of politics.
Andre, let me show you a tweet that I noticed that we can file under the not helping category. Here's David Duke, the former Klan leader, tweeting an image of the deplorables. It's like the movie The Dependables, except the faces of the stars have been replaced with people such as Donald Trump and the Trump sons, et cetera. And then David Duke on the far right. And David Duke quoted, "Anti-racist is a code word for anti-white." David Duke is deplorable. Right, Andre?
Absolutely. I can tell you this, Jake. I supported Donald Trump way back when, in February. And I feel like we've become the divided states of America. I don't ever remember political candidates getting into this much negativity. I hope both candidates will talk more about policy, because the folks I'm talking to, they want to know where the country's going. They want to know what each candidate is going to do to improve their lives. It's not alt-right. It's not alt-left. It's alt-delete. It's get the bums out. It's changed the whole process.
Good. You should
And
write
they're
that down.
fed up. They really are. And so this is bigger than her taking a shot or him taking a shot, even my own candidate, Donald Trump. I think he has so many attributes that he should be talking about instead of talking about Hillary. And so I want to see him move in that direction.
I want to add to what Andre's saying. I'm a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 6. And I have taught my children and my grandchildren we don't call people names, that we allow them to talk about what they believe in, and then we respect what they believe in. And I think for a presidential candidate, they need to get away from this calling names on both sides. This is about teaching our children and our grandchildren of how to act, how to have a healthy relationship with other people that disagree with you, and get away from the names. Let's talk about what it is that we disagree about. We can have strong disagreements on this, but I don't really like this calling people names.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but another part about being a leader, and something that I've been begging the Republican Party and Donald Trump to do, is that, yes, there are factions of deplorables that I don't have much respect
Would
for
you call
bigots.
your own president for that as well?
I don't have much respect for misogynists, for xenophobes, and for bigots. And for people to actually, for him to embrace that at certain points. I was backstage on set when Jake Tapper asked him multiple times about David Duke, and he embraced that. He did not repudiate that. And all I'm asking is, I agree with you wholeheartedly about name calling, but there's a certain point when you have to take some leadership and say, that is not what this country's built upon. The people who wear Confederate flag T-shirts at the rally and say, let's make America great again, that petrifies me. It literally petrifies me, because that is not what our country is about.
Congressman, I want to respond to that.
I will agree that I don't like it when even folks in my own party call one another names. It's not, and especially when we get onto the national scene where we have children and our grandchildren are watching this and saying, well, look at these leaders that are calling each other names. How can I say when my grandchild gets called to the office for calling somebody a name that they're wrong, when they can point to our leaders of our country that call people names? Let's not put people in baskets. Let's bring America together. Let's make America great again. When I was growing up, that was not the thing that you were to do, is to call people names. Yes, I might disagree with you, but let's agree
And Jake, people are desperate. They want to know what the economy is going to do. They want to know if they're going to be able to get a better job. They want to know if they're going to be safe in their own country. And so much of the whole discussion now is about how bad the other candidate is. I want people to be excited because they're going out to vote for a businessman who will be something totally different than what Washington's seen in decades of where the direction of the country goes.
It would be nice to cover a more pleasant race. I appreciate that. Thanks to the panel. It's really great. And I want to mention that the video we saw of Clinton getting into her car earlier came from Zenik Gazda. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Zenik Gazda. CNN will continue following that story throughout the day. Coming up, 15 years after 9/11, are we safer? We'll talk to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security next.